Does Donald Trump want to achieve peace in Ukraine or not? The true intentions of the United States could in fact be quite different. But the truth is that Vladimir Putin has not been fooled. Moreover, he's proven to be much smarter than Donald Trump and has already surpassed him. What has Vladimir Putin done to challenge Donald Trump? How will the United States respond? And above all, what is really intended to be achieved with that 28-point plan because peace? I'll tell you right now, that's not it. Stay until the end, because there I'll tell you how, under the cover of the best intentions. The United States, well, what a huge surprise, has done its thing again, because this has never really been about Ukraine. It's actually about the distribution of power on the international stage and about setting a model to follow on a global scale. I'm Liu Sivaya, a geopolitical analyst and correspondent for The Random Bus. Subscribe to this channel so the West never tricks you with its democratic tales. Let's begin. We're starting as usual from the beginning, but first, a very important detail. I need your full attention at all times, because every step in this report, in this detailed analysis of the situation, is absolutely fundamental and key to understanding the global situation. Well, after having largely fixed the world, solving up to 8 conflicts on a global scale, including the one between India and Pakistan, Donald Trump still has the goal of solving the Ukrainian conflict, and he has the star tool for it. I have
said it, that would be one of my first. I made 8 deals between countries, including India and Pakistan. The one I thought would be for me, because I have a very good relationship with President Putin, I thought it would maybe be faster, but it takes 2 to tango.
His 28-point plan, which he has already presented to the Ukrainian side and also to the Russian side, is now putting pressure on Vladimir Zelensky. Why? Why is it like that? Militarily, the Ukrainian front is essentially collapsing. Russia is already taking some towns under its control, key towns, for example, Kupiansk. But the truth is that we are about to see Russia repeat this success with at least 5 other different cities, and also advance in other quite unexpected regions, both for Ukraine and for the United States. So much so that where the front was previously stalled, for example, in the Zaporozhye region, it has now started to move. And in what way? And Russia is no longer just threatening to finish controlling the regions it has already included in its constitution, namely Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. But it could even end up taking over the Kharkov region, where it has just liberated, according to its own terms, the town of Kupiansk, the Sumy region, where there are also quite significant advances, and the Dnipropetrovsk region, whose assault by the Russian Federation has surprised not only the Ukrainian command, but directly the top leadership of NATO. To this, we must add the very clear possibility that Russia will do the same. Also in the Chernihiv region, which until now was neither present nor expected, but it is increasingly starting to appear in more and more reports that we receive directly from the battlefield. There's something else to add to this, another key point. Russia has already developed high-explosive aerial bomb and CAP aerial bombs capable of reaching up to 200 kilometers beyond the line of contact. This would directly endanger the Kiev region if Russia were to reach Chernihiv. And another upgrade is being developed so that these same high-explosive aerial bomb and CAP bombs can reach up to 400 kilometers in range. That is, once those breaches are made within the Ukrainian defenses, some of which are already beginning to take place. For example, in the Zaporozhye region, for example, in the Kharkov region, with the recent capture of Kupiansk, Russia could basically start advancing without control, even reaching the Chernihiv region and possibly even the Kiev region. And here we have to remember another absolutely key fact. This is not a war between Russia and Ukraine, but a war of NATO against the Russian Federation. That is to say, the one who is risking military defeat, at the very least, is NATO itself, and therefore ultimately the United States. The defeat that Russia could inflict on the supposedly most powerful country in the world could have, at the very least, four different aspects. We are talking, of course, about a media defeat, not only before the international community, but even before the American population itself. We are talking, of course, about military defeat in the clearest and most direct terms, and about economic defeat, because the blow to the economy, both American and European, which depends on the American economy, and therefore the one that is giving it a significant amount of money, would be absolutely brutal, and the dollar would definitely end up staggering. And in what way? And finally, and most importantly, the reputational defeat in terms of the definitive loss of United States hegemony. This would be something like the final nail in the coffin of total United States control over the world. The stakes are indeed very high. And seen this way, it makes perfect sense. Why has the United States administration been in such a hurry to pressure Ukraine to accept this plan as soon as possible? Of the 28 points. And here it seems they've resorted to one of the things the Kiev regime actually never stopped having, which is the tremendous corruption that has plagued Ukraine practically since it came into existence. Here it's up to you to determine to what extent it's a coincidence or not that the information about the supposed corruption of Volodymyr Zelensky, practically his entire government, with ministers who have already been dismissed, and some have even left the country. Did it come out by coincidence or not? Because, of course, there's the possibility that the alleged corruption of Zelensky has been a catalyst for the United States to start taking action, which is, in fact, what the Western media is currently trying to sell. But there's also the possibility that it wasn't a coincidence at all. In other words, there's also the possibility that Vladimir and his associates' dirty tricks weren't used by the United States as a catalyst. I mean, they didn't really surprise the country at all, but rather served as a tool. It initially came from National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Ukraine's anti-corruption agency, which is ultimately controlled by Washington, knowing that the situation at the front simply couldn't go any further. An analysis that, in fact, was recently made by Donald Trump himself. The United States decided to act so as not to lose definitively and in front of the whole world to the Russian Federation. Donald Trump, therefore seeing that indeed the critical moment had already arrived, trying to save their belongings, both of himself as a political and media figure, as well as of his own government, and therefore of American interests. He has started to put pressure on Ukraine, presenting his flagship 28-point plan. Vladimir Zelensky did not take long to react, but he did so in a somewhat ambiguous way.
Ukraine may face a very difficult choice. Either the loss of dignity, or the risk of losing a key partner, or the complicated 28 points, or an extremely hard winter, the hardest one, and further risk. We will calmly work with America and all our partners, and there will be a constructive search for solutions with our main partner. I will present arguments, I will persuade, offer alternatives, but definitely reasons to say that it's Ukraine that doesn't want peace, that it's Ukraine disrupting the process, and that Ukraine isn't ready for diplomacy. I'm speaking to all Ukrainians, our people, citizens, politicians. Everyone needs to pull together, get a grip, and stop the bickering and political games. The state must function. The parliament of a country at war must work in unity, and the government of a country at war must work effectively. And all of us together must not forget or confuse who exactly is Ukraine's enemy today. Dear Ukrainians, the coming week will be very difficult and full of events. You are a mature, intelligent, and conscious people who have proven this more than once, who understand that during this time there will be a lot of pressure, political, informational, and various other kinds, to weaken us, to divide us.
Emotions, few concrete facts. It's not at all clear what decision Ukraine will ultimately make, which is something the United States simply cannot allow, and even less so Donald Trump on a personal level. He has maintained the pressure. And right after that, the White House made a public announcement that Ukraine had to approve this plan before November 27th, which just happens to coincide with Thanksgiving. From that point on, the media pressure, especially from the White House, just kept growing. So Donald Trump, first of all, said that Vladimir Zelensky, if he didn't want to make a deal, could just keep fighting. He also described both the entire Ukrainian people and, of course, Vladimir Zelensky himself. The situation for Ukraine is indeed becoming more and more critical. It is losing more and more territory and more soldiers. The harsh winter is approaching, and in terms of energy, things aren't looking very good either.
In the past month, 25,000 soldiers were lost, something unseen since World War II. And they're losing about 6,000 or 7,000 a week between the two in terms of dead soldiers. And
She always ended with a crucial detail. When asked by the press if the plan being presented to Ukraine was a definitive one, she would reply that it wasn't.
And
This, of course, can be interpreted from at least two perspectives. That, on one hand, it could improve, and therefore, if Volodymyr Zelensky decides to approve it now, it could end up bringing him quite a bit more benefits than it initially seems. But on the other hand, it could get even worse. Let's go. It's a coded message that comes to confirm something that many of us already knew from the beginning, that Ukraine's position is all too clear. Naturally, he must nod and quiet those who once believed they were independent. That's right, especially judging by the first points of it. From Washington, they've tried everything to make it seem, in fact, quite the opposite. In this way, the Russian Federation would be granted the entire territory of Donbass, as well as the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia, but frozen exactly along the line of contact. Ukraine would become a permanently non-aligned country officially declared by itself. That is, it would never join NATO, nor would it be able to possess nuclear weapons. Its army would be reduced, although it's still not clear to what number. Donald Trump once claimed Ukraine had 600,000 soldiers at the start of the special military operation, but this was not the case. But except for this small point, everything else seems exactly like what Russia wanted from the beginning. Also, NATO troops wouldn't be either. For Vladimir Putin. It seems like a perfect plan, but is it really? In other words, the points we just mentioned actually correspond almost entirely to the objectives he has set. The Russian Federation considers these objectives as the requirements to successfully complete the special military operation in its entirety. But here there is an absolutely fundamental point. Russia will achieve these objectives no matter what. Many of them have already been achieved, or at the very least, the special military operation will not end until they are accomplished. Vladimir Putin has already made this extremely clear. Russia is willing to go as far as necessary and is willing, and in fact, is fine with achieving it through military means. But we won't negotiate on just any terms.
A first example, Kupiansk. Recently, as we remember, on May 4th, or was it November, that is 2 weeks ago, in Kiev, it was publicly stated that there were no more than 60 Russian servicemen in this city. And within the next few days, as it was said, this city will be completely unblocked by Ukrainian forces. But I want to inform you that already at that time, as of November 4, the city of Kupiansk was almost entirely and completely under the control of the Russian armed forces. Now, guys, as they say, we're just finishing up, clearing only certain blocks and streets. The fate of the city had already been completely decided at that moment. What does this tell us? That the events that happened in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated in other key areas of the front. Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but inevitably it will be repeated.
Exactly as a benefit, something he would have already achieved if he had continued advancing on the ground, which he is actually doing now, in fact, at a forced pace, much faster than anyone could have expected. Neither Ukraine nor much less NATO. That's exactly what the 28-point plan from the United States is for, to try to stop this bloodshed through military means. But here the United States comes with its star proposal, the economic one, where Russia, it seems, would gain benefits, would return to the international market, to the western part of it, that is to the G8. It would avoid the terrible sanctions that weigh so heavily on it. But in exchange, it would have to agree to some plans previously established by Donald Trump. Well, of course, the return to the much desired economic and political cooperation by Russia, and maybe even at some point military cooperation with the United States, would have to come at some price. But how lucky is Vladimir Putin? Donald Trump couldn't possibly like him more, so he's going to make this really cheap for him. First of all, something like a peace council is going to be established, or I should say, the Peace Council. Who would lead it? Of course, Donald Trump himself. Man, the main mediator of the realm. Where would we be without him? Especially in terms of media coverage, because that's where he would benefit, both within his own country and internationally. To be the great mediator who has achieved definitive peace between Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, he is making sure that it unfolds according to the terms he sets. If it were just the media aspect, this could even be acceptable. The truth is, nothing could be further from reality. The final decisions would belong to Donald Trump. But to this, we have to add the entire economic bloc, where the Fund for the Development of Ukraine would be created, an organization that would manage all kinds of investments and projects. In short, it's all about money, which could even encourage either the current Kiev regime or the future Ukrainian administration, depending on how Ukraine ends up politically. After these 28 points to steal even more and better, because ultimately it would once again fill the country with monetary flows. If the United States pays Ukraine to do whatever it wants, why should Russia care? Yes, but with a small nuance. Who is going to pay for all this? In fact, the White House largely intends it to be the Russian Federation. Well, the Russian Federation and the European Union, which isn't even being asked about anything related to this agreement. Yes, as you hear, do you remember the frozen funds that Europe now really wants to take away? Practically steal from Russia, which represents something like 140 billion. Well, according to Donald Trump's STAR plan, out of these 100 billion would go entirely to Ukraine's recovery, and the remaining money would be dedicated to various projects. In terms of Russian-American cooperation, Russia would therefore put at least 100 billion from its frozen assets, and the European Union another 100 billions. Again, without being asked, the United States keeps all the profits. Come on, what a plan. Come on. How could Vladimir Putin not accept something like that? And in fact, he still hasn't rejected it. This has been one of the most brilliant responses from the leader of the Russian Federation when it comes to handling the American bull. But before that, one more detail. Do all these 28 points encompass them in international terms? What is really intended, far beyond controlling the monetary flows going to Ukraine, is actually to maintain at any cost the American hegemony that is already in its final moments. To distance Russia from the main enemy of the United States, China, with which it has recently had better relations, impossible. And in fact, to make them end up fighting, or at least create misunderstandings between Russia and the entire global South in general terms. The United States has failed to consult the European Union, whose destruction appears to be the goal, as the second part of the main objective, to end up making it completely dependent on the Union. But it also hasn't mentioned in any way China, or India, or Brazil. In fact, none of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa countries, or the Global South. The intention was for the Russian Federation not to do it either, and for the agreement, as Donald Trump put it, to be signed by the two major powers. Therefore, humiliating, at least partially, all the others by not giving them their space in this international chess game. And all of this without actually offering Russia any real security guarantees. Because the main thing, which would be an alternative project to the current anti-Russian one in Ukraine, is not being considered within these 28 points. And therefore, what would stop the new regime in Kiev from seeking a new revenge? Also, considering that the number of soldiers in the Ukrainian army would still have to be determined. The most crucial point of all this, the United States not only intends to maintain its hegemonic power at all costs, but above all, it wants to do so by strengthening the country's currency, the dollar, as a key factor in this conflict. That's precisely where this attempt comes from. To cut off or at least reduce economic cooperation between Russia and China, while at the same time strengthening economic cooperation between Russia and the United States. And that's because, in order to access the United States market, Russia would necessarily have to go back to trading in dollars, which it already does to a much lesser extent when trading with China, using both rubles and yuan. And with this, that is, with Russia's return to the dollar, the United States would, of course, strengthen its currency and therefore its economy and its hegemonic position in the world. It must be said that for China, this would be a very hard blow, as well as a clear betrayal that indeed would almost certainly be seen that way from Beijing. As such, it would complicate relations between the countries, which lately have become more than just friendly partners. Speaking of Russia and China, we can conclude that the United States is trying to win through diplomacy. What it knows for sure is that it will never be able, especially under the current circumstances, to win militarily. That's how we reach this wonderful and, for the United States, surprising situation. At this point, what seemed like a simple attempt to fight for world peace has actually turned out to be, once again, an attempt by the United States to destroy the multipolar world, which has already become a reality, in order to return to the previous hegemonic order of American command and control. The plan seemed perfect, practically infallible, but it turns out it ran into the greatest strategist in geopolitical terms. At the international level, Vladimir Putin has already responded to the United States without naming Donald Trump or the country. He has done it in an absolutely brilliant way. On one hand, he has already completely ruled out any American attempt to pit him against his partners and even his friends. He has specifically mentioned the agreement with this plan by all of Russia's international partners. And not only that, but he has mentioned them, at least the most important ones, in a detailed and thorough manner. Yes, that's right. On one hand, the United States, this plan has proven to be absolutely flexible when it comes to negotiating it. But above all, he mentioned and emphasized again that the partners of the Russian Federation were very much in agreement with this new attempt to establish peace in Ukraine. And he mentioned them by their full names.
The left has asked us to make certain commitments to demonstrate, as they put it, flexibility. The main purpose of the meeting in Alaska, the main objective of the meeting in Alaska, was that in the negotiation process in Anchorage. We confirm that despite certain questions and difficulties on our part, we agree. And we are ready to express the flexibility it offers us. For all these reasons, we inform all our friends and colleagues from the South, including the Dominican Republic, India, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the United Arab Emirates, Brazil, and other countries, as well as countries from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. All our friends and colleagues, I want to clarify, Kaliman.
Lotto has done something practically impossible. He has returned a single ball to two courts at the same time. Did he push for the suspension of the previous report? But anyway, there he ran into Ukraine, which is not willing to sign absolutely anything. So the United States, the power at the international level, Donald Trump himself had to rethink and rewrite the plan because Zelensky didn't think it was very good. I bet you don't have the guts. Blaming Ukraine for not wanting peace, which is true, while also provoking Donald Trump's fragile ego, hold my
tie during the negotiations in Alaska, there was a certain pause from the American side. And we know that this is related to Ukraine's actual rejection of the peace settlement plan proposed by President Trump. I believe that's exactly why a new version appeared, essentially a modernized plan now consisting of 28 points. We have this text. We received it through the existing channels of communication with the American administration. I believe that it can also serve as the basis for a final peace settlement. But this text is not being discussed with us in detail, and I can guess why. The reason, I suppose, is the same. The United States administration has not yet managed to reach an agreement with the Ukraine-Contra. It seems that Ukraine and its European allies are still under illusions and want to force Russia into a strategic battle on the battlefield. I think this position is based on not such a low level of competence. I'm not going to discuss this part of the topic now, but at the very least, this position is related to the lack of objective information about the situation on the battlefield. And I suppose that neither in Ukraine nor in Europe do they understand what this could ultimately lead to.
Lead to, above all, more than anything else. Vladimir Putin makes it clear and emphasizes that the position held by the Russian Federation on the international stage is no longer the same as before. About the special military operation, you have tried to defeat us militarily, economically, and politically. We remember perfectly well, but it turns out that now we are no longer in a position where we have to bow to anyone's will. We have spent many years surviving your sanctions, your attacks, and your ever-increasing militarism. We long for peace more than anyone, but if what you want is war, we are willing to keep advancing on the ground in military terms, basically until we achieve the goals we have set for ourselves, because we are free, independent, and
sovereign. Kupiansk is completely and entirely in the hands of the Russian armed forces. What does this mean? If Kyiv does not want to discuss President Trump's proposal and refuses it, then both they and the European warmongers must understand that the events that happened in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated in other key areas of the front. And overall, we are satisfied with this. Since the host is not going to lose anyone to criticism, we will not lose anyone, we will not lose a single person. Purchases.
that is, do we want peace? Of course we do, but certainly not at any price. From here on, we'll have to keep watching how events unfold and what each side does. But one thing is absolutely clear. No matter how much the United States and its followers try to spin the issue, the new multipolar world order is already a reality. The Russian Federation, as an independent international actor, again, free and sovereign, is another reality they won't be able to avoid either. In other words, whether they like it or not, the United States will have to gradually get used to the fact that it is no longer the master of the international estate. Will they cling to that role no matter what? Absolutely. So we can still expect anything from them.